what's up? I'm Amin Dhillon, and welcome to my podcast. I'm sitting down with the movers and shakers and the stars to chat about life, love, business, and being a total boss. It's raw, it's candid, it's the stories behind the headlines. This is In Conversation. Okay, Raghav, thank you so much for being on the podcast. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You are in self-isolation. Where?
I'm in Calgary.
Calgary?
So, I was flying. I was in Dubai right when this was all sort of kicking off. And I came back and I wasn't feeling well. So I've been kind of trying to make sure much as I can for a couple of weeks, I was totally on my own. So it's such a strange time. I'm finding most people are fairly due diligent, but it's like, I'm turning into my parents a little bit when I see people like not social distancing. I'm like upset, there's like this upset in me that like there seems to be a section of society that still is not taking it as seriously as I hope they would. So I just hope we get through this quickly. We're unfortunately going to lose more people, and it's just sad.
What's it like just having all this time now to reflect? Because artists like you're constantly either in the studio or traveling, always thinking of the next project. So now you have all this downtime, probably the most you've ever had in a long chunk of time. What is that like, being with your thoughts? Like, what are you thinking these days?
Oh boy, it's a roller coaster. I mean, it depends how honest you are with yourself. Like, I have a basement full of plaques and awards and videos that have been in boxes for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really celebrated my career, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of going through stuff and picking it out of boxes, even they're not hung up yet. I'm like the worst handyman in the world, but at least they're on the floor now.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at them is kind of cool. And then also going through old agreements and deals that I had. I have all my legal papers to go through and old hard drives with footage on them. And some of them have it's been kind of emotional going through some old stuff. Seeing old friends and good times you had that you don't talk to anymore, and then it goes on to the regrets of like, oh, that was such a great song. Why didn't it come out? That was this was going to happen. Why didn't it happen? Oh, I wish I'd done this differently. So it's like a roller coaster of emotions of literally going into the vault of a 15-year career where you haven't had a moment to slow down. And even though for the majority of the last few years I've been out of the public eye for the most part. Between shows and all the music work that I do, like I've been busier than I was at the beginning of my career. So there's this weird sort of disconnect between how busy I am and how visible I am. And part of that has been my own reflection upon social media and kind of the value of it. And, I grew up, I think it's fair to say now, in the artist generation, just before social media. And so I've been sort of a failure at seeing its importance because I think I sort of neglected it as an art form. And I was like, oh, this is a false reality. If people love a song, they're going to love it. And so now it's like looking at that in a different light when you have time to actually view it, So I think artists should be questioning both things they've done well and done wrong and taking this time to be fearless about it.
Mm. Can I ask you, when you're looking in the box of awards and plaques and photos, was there one in particular that you were like emotional about, or one that just made you so happy to see it?
Not really. I mean, it's pretty much all of them. There's kind of, going through the hard drives was very emotional for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a super emotional guy, maybe more recently with some perspective and just what's happening. And thinking about health of family and who you can't see and all that kind of stuff. But going through hard drives and stuff was really like beautiful and gut wrenching, because there's times when you're putting out a record, when you have the support of a major record label, that you have experiences that you'll never have again in life. You know what I mean? Because when you're doing it independently, I do the same shows. I'm getting the same accolades when I have a hit record. But you don't have the time because you're doing so much. You cannot stop and smell the roses with it, But when you have a major record label like I did at the beginning of my career, and I look at some of those times, and you have more time to sort of enjoy it and have fun with it, And I think that's sort of natural for anybody reminiscent. I mean, I think if I ask you honestly to reminisce on good times you had 10 years ago, I mean, you can't help but feel nostalgic about them. And when they are attached, not that mine are different or special, but when they're attached to physical things that I can watch or interviews or see my demeanor or see my happiness or see my sadness or see my anger or whatever emotion I can see that's going on in me on those old hard drives, it's like, you sort of wish you could talk to yourself and be like, oh, this is going to happen. It's going to change your perspective on this, and this is going to happen. And I see a certain confidence that I think it's good as you get older to question your confidence. I think people in their 20s should be overtly confident. It must be something about hormones and not knowing everything, but also knowing enough to know that you've become independent. And looking at some of that footage, like I feel an intense pride about how I conducted myself in lots of ways. And then I'm able to say, oh, that was a stupid mistake and I probably should have done that better. So it's been wonderful to get perspective on what I've done right, what I've done wrong, and hopefully help use that to help guide me in the future.
Yeah. Wow, that's really intense. I actually haven't even done that much in quarantine, so you've done more than that. Because I actually, when you were just saying, like, when you reflect back on moments, I was actually thinking when you said that, I was like, you're right. I actually don't usually have time to stop and reflect. Usually you're always thinking, okay, like, what's the next thing, right? So that's the one thing that I think you've given me the idea that I should go back and reflect on some of the big moments. It's nice.
Absolutely. And some of the narratives that I've put forth in my life of why certain things happened and why they didn't happen, when you're able to go back and see in footage or interviews or behind the scenes or pictures, you're able to go, oh, the way I remember it is not how it happened. I've conducted that narrative, or I've remembered that narrative slightly incorrectly, totally incorrectly, or totally correctly. It's one of those three things. And for me as an artist, it's allowed me to reflect, because where I've struggled as an artist was not feeling bitter that the sound that I feel I sort of pioneered was sort of bastardized by Bollywood and taken and kind of used and abused, like without really, uh, what's the word I want to use here? But it felt like it was a bit of a rip from some of the stuff I'd done earlier, and I remember feeling quite bitter about that. And uh, what I've learned through sort of abandoning the fight of dealing with Bollywood, which is like a very difficult thing to do in terms of how they conduct their business, for the most part, not everybody, was that it built in me a frustration of dealing with things where I felt, hey, I sent you a demo and now I'm hearing that demo in a movie, you ripped it, you copied it. And it's like, you can only get screwed over so many times before you kind of get frustrated by it. And that's a real conundrum, because frustration is a wasted emotion. Like you can't accomplish anything by being frustrated. I mean, that's what I'm learning now tactilely. And when you take that into other walks of life where you've either succeeded or failed, it's a powerful thing. And before the quarantine, because you're just going, especially as an artist, you go, okay, I got till 40 to do this. I got till 50 to do this. Who knows what's going to happen when I'm 55 or 60, where I'm going to be. Will people take my phone call? Will it be long before that they don't take my phone call? That sort of insecurity drives you to keep going, especially if you have a kid now. It's like, oh my God, I have a 3-year-old daughter. I want to make sure that not only is she abundantly well provided for, but I also want her to be able to see me when she's 12 or 13 years old be in a successful state of my career. So I'm trying to plant seeds now that will turn into forests in a decade, so that she gets to see a side of my life that maybe I wasn't as motivated to re-engage in again, because I was selfishly thinking I'd experience it all myself,
How do you retain control though? Because when you're saying that, and when you were just talking about the Bollywood industry, because I've heard that from many artists that either they feel like it's difficult to get into the industry, if they're like a singer or an actor. But I've also heard that oftentimes it's not just even Bollywood, but other artists rip them off, they feel like. So I was thinking, like, how do you stop that? Because it's such a widespread problem.
Look, the entertainment industry is an entirely abusive industry from
Mm-hmm.
top to bottom, but
Mm-hmm.
there's so many wonderful things about it.
Of course.
So it's a complete mind. We let us swear it's a mind fuck, really,
Mm-hmm.
So the smartest people I've met in my life, and I've hung out with Oxford and Harvard graduates, people that are in the political world who are supremely successful and intelligent. These smartest people I've met in my life are artists,
Mm-hmm.
actors, actresses, musicians, producers, engineers, dancers. There is people say you can't compare. Well, you kind of can. They have a tapped into an intelligence that allows them to see life through a different perspective that both creates positivity and adds some negativity in the life.
Mm-hmm.
But I have such a great respect for artists. And when you're in the industry, especially to the level that, my career started at as a professional career, there's so much positive collateral that comes from that. And there's some negative equity that comes from that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And in a world where we're so, like social media again, where we're so intensely trying to only show the good about us. You're Indian, you know what I mean? When I'm not saying this about your family, but generally in the Indian community, we don't share our weaknesses with one another. We're all trying to make sure that, my daughter is better than your daughter, is better than your son, better than yours. So there's this competitive nature to a minor extent. That's fine. That's sort of social structure. The entertainment industry is a million times that. You know what I mean? And so that's uncomfortable for me. I feel it's fraudulent. So when you engage in fraudulence, you feel regret over it. And then you see other people engaging in fraudulence and succeeding either monetarily or bigger numbers on social media, and you sort of lambaste them for it, but you also understand it. It's very confusing. And sometimes you can become too sanctimonious in your own position. I've done that for sure. And sometimes you don't do things for the greater good, and I've also done that for sure. So I say you don't give any of the industries any power. You maintain your integrity, but you also are not entirely sanctimonious about your position, because the best artists have teams. So when I started making all my decisions on my own and having successes doing it, I convinced myself probably that I didn't need a team necessarily. The bad thing about teams is they also don't always look out for your best interest, and money goes missing, or they're not creatively on board with you. So it's such a conundrum. I'm not giving you I'm giving you a rambling answer, but it's because I think about it a lot, because I don't know the answer. And I look at people who've succeeded at a level, we're talking about the Jacksons or the Beyoncés or the Taylor Swifts of the world, and you kind of go, oh my goodness, like it's such a well-oiled machine, and they're either incredible human beings or totally maniacal, like, because it requires something that makes you almost either be completely introspective and be centered in exactly who you are, or not give a shit. Because if my daughter grew up to be an artist, I'd be delighted. I wouldn't push her into it because that's ridiculous. But if she grew up to be an artist, I'd be delighted, because it's such a roller coaster. It's like a life I can't describe. It's imperfect, but in that imperfection is like you're living. It's like an actual life that has shit going on, that means something, that feels good, that comes with failure, that, you got to learn to deal with failure. You got to learn to deal with rejection. You have to learn to deal with like mass adulation. I remember the first time I landed in India when Storyteller came out, there was like 1,000 people outside the hotel chanting my name. Like, that's amazing. There's also some collateral damage that comes from that, and you can't process that for a very long time. And it's addictive. And it's also something that you realize after a while is not necessarily steeped in your entire reality. I'm not giving you any answers. I'm just telling you how fucking confusing it is.
I like hearing your perspective, though, because you've had such a long career. Like, I remember always hearing your latest songs, your albums, but like, I just feel like here in Canada, we don't go crazy. Like, I was actually thinking about that, because when I interview artists and I see their footage from outside of Canada, it's like craziness, right? Like people stalking. Yeah. And then here I feel like, you're a Canadian artist, but we're so chill about it. And I was like, actually, there was a moment when I was thinking about, I heard your song Fire on the radio, and I didn't realize it was yours. And when the radio jockey said your name, I was like proud, because I was like, I've always wondered why we don't have more Indo-Canadian or even just South Asian artists on mainstream radio. And then I was like, this is a big deal. But then I felt like nobody was making a like, oh my God, Raghav's on mainstream. So I was like, maybe we're just at a point where we're just like, Raghav is just an artist. We don't have to like put him in a category. So anyways, I just saying, as a brown person, I was really proud to hear you on the radio, because I've always wanted more representation on the radio.
I appreciate that. And, to radio's credit, they picked it because it was a great record. But when I came back from, my mom had like uh, she had a heart condition that led to sort of a vent. It's not technically a heart attack, but it was basically a heart attack. It was very scary. In about 2011, I was kind of floundering at that time, going, okay, like, do I want to stay in England? It feels like, what happened in England was that my name was Raghav, like it was Indian. It wasn't my name wasn't Ricky Ray. It wasn't culturally ambiguous. And the Asian network was a lane that was a huge support, but I also felt like the BBC, which controlled radio in the UK, started to go, well, we don't have, like, this doesn't, if it's a Raghav record, it should be on Asian network, which sort of minimized the audience that I'd sort of built. And that's not to say that I don't take credit for some of the failures at that time in my music. I mean, or take responsibility, sorry. I mean, for sure. But there was this idea that the Indian thing was done. Even before that, like 2008, 2009, that the Indians had, Jay and Rishi and I kind of had our run. And then Jay went to the States, and obviously it was like amazing, successful record with Down. And I was still making an album that was like half Hindi, half English, like kind of what my fans loved me for the first time. But I was finding it wasn't getting the same platform it was when I put out my first record. And it was a pretty good record. So I had to look internally at what failures I was making to not have that connect in the UK at the same level that was a home base, and how the scope of the industry had changed as well. And what had definitely changed was we had gone through that phase thinking, and I say we, I mean that scene at that time, thinking we had finally cracked the mainstream. I got a Mobile Award. Jane and I were doing shows all over the place. It was amazing. But to an extent, they made us feel like a novelty. It was like, okay, this Brown thing is sort of done. So then it was like, okay, well, do I go to India and pursue my fan base there to launch that into kind of a mainstream Bollywood career? And that wasn't who I was as an artist. I was a guy who invented or helped create this sort of sound. And so I was sort of steadfast in doing that. And I thought maybe it's time to go to Canada and use that as an entry point into the States, where we can take the culture to the next level. Because as much as I was proud of Jay's record, it wasn't necessarily a cultural moment, if that makes sense. It was to a great degree that he is who he is, but it wasn't like Indian sounds were on the radio. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do that, because that's who I am. I'm the Omeri Jane Jan guy and the Teri Batam guy that incorporates it. That's what I do. And when I came back to Canada, I was still like selling out stadiums in parts of the world, in 2010, 2011. And I couldn't get a record deal there. Like everyone was like, no. Name's too hard. Cultural doesn't really work here. Like it wasn't even about the music. It was like really disheartening and very racist. Like very, very racist. I don't use that word a lot because I think people use it as a crutch sometimes, but it was very racist. And then I got a small imprint in Victoria, Cordova Bay, that signed my record, and Fire was like a smash. But it was a smash, but it wasn't the sound that defined who I was, that I wanted to get across to the world. I sort of did it as like a lost leader, as a launching pad into introducing people to my ability so they could get into more of the depth of my global pop. And that didn't happen. I mean, when Fire was a huge hit, I met with Cash Money, I met with all these labels, and I remember one very prominent, very well-known label executive said to me, "Your name is too close to raghead," which is a racially derogatory term. And he wasn't being racist himself. He was just telling me, long before the days of Donald Trump and his supporters, that we don't do that. It doesn't happen here. And I remember thinking, oh, that's so weird. Like you have a president with the middle name Hussein. Like, how does that work? But years later, you understand that it's like, if something is so superior that it can land in a level of normalcy where they accept it, great. But if they have a choice as to whether to put their quarterly budget into it, they're not going to do that. That Ricky Ray would have kept more culturally ambiguous and probably led to more financial gain, and it would have sucked some of the sound out of me, So that was a really disheartening time for me, because it was this reality that all of a sudden, 3 years earlier, I had white people chanting my name at events, and now I was being told that I couldn't be accepted outside of my culture, even despite having like a huge hit record and Fire in Canada. So like that, I'll use the word again, that's a kind of a mind fuck, you know what I mean? It doesn't add up. People love the record, everyone's buying it. The general public seems to love it, but there's an idea that my brand simply won't work based on my name or the color of my skin or the culture that I represent or the future trajectory of what my art is. So that was really difficult. It made me a less prolific artist because I was like completely lost. Because you take a entry point into your career through being exactly who you are and it resonating, and slowly one by one. I mean, we've all been in relationships like this, or we've been the person in the relationship where you're like, it starts out amazing, and one by one by one by one by one, you find fault in the other person. And it drains the other person, and it drains you, depending on who you are. And it's like, oh my God, I came into this feeling amazing, smart, sexy, cool, talented, funny, da 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 da, and I leave feeling not so much. And so, like, sometimes it's like overt people are trying to hurt you, and sometimes in life that just happens. You know, it just chips away at you. So it took me a long while to kind of understand exactly who I was again. And I came from a school where Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, they took time in between their records. That time sort of cost me in terms of Instagram followers or whatever. But I never really cared for that too much. So only recently, only in the last 2 years, do I really go, okay, I know what chapter 2 looks like. I have to stop trying to write chapter 1. And chapter 2 is going to be unique and different and amazing and harder, because the name, the lens that people have on you will always be associated with their nostalgia of a certain moment. So the thin line between feeding them what they want and making sure you let them know that you embrace that and you grow from it is like, you know, let's do a podcast in 5 years and see how I figured that out.
Yeah.
So that's something that, you know, I'm going through right now, and that my music is indicative of, is celebrating the past, embracing the nostalgia, but trying not to live in it necessarily, and being a fresh new artist with different perspective. You know, someone at a show the other day, like, they're like, it's your boy Raghav, and I'm like, oh, it's not your boy Raghav. It's like Raghav with a kid who's got, you know, a couple of mortgages. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's not your boy anymore. I'm not like, we're not grinding after the show anymore. It's like a little, it's a little different. Mm-hmm. So you maintain your youth while also understanding that your message is going to be a little different, and how can that not appear to be disconnected?
You're making me really curious now in terms of because I know we're going to get into it. You're re-releasing some music that never got released in some of the music videos. But I was also now just thinking, you're obviously going to be putting out new music. So I'm like, I just don't even know now what to expect in terms of when you actually hit the studio, what you're going to record. Do you have an idea of what you're going to be like recording?
Oh yeah, because like now I know that there should be no rules. If you look at the Storyteller record, I don't know if you've heard the record in its entirety. There's jazz records on there, Baby I'm Amazed, and Winter in My Mind are like totally jazz records. Like they could be on Jazz FM. Mm-hmm. And there's reggae records on there, and there's these pop Bollywood kind of emotional records on there, and then there's club bangers on there, and it's like all over the place. Mm-hmm. Because you don't have fear when you first entered the industry. You're being welcomed and signed for who you are. I dealt with a lot of rejection before that, but I was like, fuck these guys. Like, they're rejecting a winner, and then you do win, and you're like, oh, fuck them again. Like, obviously I knew I was right, you know? So that is the mentality I've embraced again. The next single is called Sufi, and it's out on April 30th, I think. And it's the most beautiful song I've ever recorded, but it's a beautiful Hindi song. And normally I would have said, I'll release a couple of club bangers and then I can get to the ballad and da-da. And I think one thing that you got to remember is that you only learn about the business when you're in the business, and then you can also take those assets that you learn and over strategize, you know. And I study labels like Bad Boy and Motown and all these records, you know, and during their runs, and then during their, they didn't think. I don't think there was any thinking going on. It was just like, yo, this is dope. Let's go. Here's a bag of money, make it happen. And so I'm trying to re-embrace that mentality of like, no, this sounds amazing. Let's do it.
So is it going to be a variety then? Because this upcoming song is all Hindi. Are you going to be doing like the mix again? Are you going to do some just all English, some
Totally. There's
club
another
bangers,
song
whatever?
after that. I've reconnected with Mushtaq, who produced Can't Get Enough and Let's Work It Out and No No on the first album. And we've written like, we took 10 years off from each other and we just went back in the studio. And there's certain moments in life where you're like, I don't know if you've ever gotten back together with an ex and it's like, oh, no, why did I do that? Or you get back together with an ex and you're like, this is, whoa. And I remember why I missed you. And so getting back together with Mush was the latter. It was like, oh, no, nobody understands me or my brain or my musicality like Mush does.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a record that I think will make people feel like the ingredients come together perfectly like it did on Can't Get Enough or Let's Work It Out or those early records.
So are you still in the progress of recording this new album or is it done?
Oh, yeah. No, we were I was in Dubai recording when all of a sudden the world collapsed. So I don't think I'll ever put out an album, but I think it'll be track after track after track.
Okay.
But, I saw somewhere, it was someone's TED Talk. She's unbelievable. And the name's Stacey Abrams, who should be the governor of Georgia. And she said there's three pillars. There's three things that make you fail in life. I'm going to forget them now. Fear, fatigue, and finances. And I go, oh, yeah, okay. At some point in my life, I've been, all three have been an issue, sometimes separately or sometimes at the same time. And I'm just going to keep remembering that those things aren't going to be in my mindset anymore because they weren't in the beginning. And I think most artists don't ever admit that because we live in a world that only celebrates not only, but predominantly celebrates the appearance of success as opposed to actual success. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Especially in a social media world.
So when someone comes up to me and they're like crying and they're like, oh my God, Angel Eyes. Oh my God. Like memories flood back of all the wonderful moments they had, some of the skanky things they did in the club. Like they're remembering that moment. I'm like, that's a hit record. So Fire is a hit record. I made a lot of money on Fire. It's not the same thing. It was an amazing record that I'm not disparaging. It's my record. But the feeling that it induced in people was more disposable than that. I want that. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what drives me, and that's what's going to drive me moving forward.
Let me ask you, I saw on your social media, you're very active on Twitter. And
oh, really? Oh my God, I thought I'm not.
I think you are, just because when I was just trying to catch up quickly on maybe some of the new music you're working on, there's so many tweets and replies to other people's tweets that I was like, oh, so he's really active in terms of engaging or giving out his opinions.
That's
what I mean by
how
active.
much I hate Donald Trump, to be honest, right now.
I did see a couple of those tweets.
Yeah.
But what I noticed also is you are really trying to be a champion for other artists, because we know right now it's a tough time for a lot of artists. Mm-hmm. With so many shows canceled, a lot of people's projects on hold. So, I mean, you sound like you're in a position where you're okay, but there are obviously people that haven't got that big check or are just putting out some new projects. And so you were really trying to push for artists to, for example, here to get the emergency response benefit, regardless if they're getting royalties. And I just thought, it's interesting because right now, this is where everyone's turning to artists to get, kind of make it through to self-isolation, right, in terms of content. And then those are the same people that we really need to make sure they're taken care of. So are you hearing from a lot of artists that are a little bit worried about how the music scene or the music industry is going to be changing, not for the better?
I don't know, because artists are full of shit, a lot of them. They have too much pride and they won't admit it. And everyone perceives everyone as a competitor. And I'm not in that rat race. I don't care, Maybe it's because I'm financially secure and I'm okay and I don't really got to worry about it. But maybe it's because I'm sort of past that insecurity of feeling like I retweet a lot of artists that people would consider rivals of mine to promote their records. I for the most part, don't get that in return, and I'm okay with that. But I think that there has to be a camaraderie amongst us because our industry has been decimated like no other industry in the last 15 years. I'm sure people will find analogies to tell me I'm wrong about that, but we went from a structure that's been in place since the 50s, most of it good, some of it kind of bad, to in the mid 2000s, everything's being given away for free. The artists are, art's getting you through this, but you're paying $10 a month for unlimited music. You're paying $10 a month for unlimited film. You're paying $10 a month for unlimited Tiger King updates and docuseries. The structure is one of financial planning through buying lottery tickets. And some people win the lottery and some people do really well. And most everybody else relies on grants or a million small, picking up a river of nickels to make a buck. And we've known this for a long time. This is not a normal thing. When I sold 1 million albums, people were proud of me. When Adele sold 1 million albums, it was on the CNN ticker as breaking news. That happened in 7 years, 5 years. That's a crazy change. So in Canada, we have something called the Unison Fund. They do great work. I'm selling my vinyls from the original record, Storyteller. And depending on it's about 25 to 30% is the profit margin on it after I pay for postage and the making of the vinyls. Whatever that profit is, that profit margin is going to go to the Unison Fund. So people can go on my website or just email info@raghav.com and we'll set up a link. And there's no guarantee when they'll get the record because I'm not asking anybody I work with to go to the post office right now to send vinyls, but you'll get it at some point. And then we hopefully take this moment to really look at how we compensate art. Everyone wants to pretend that it's hunky-dory, but it's not. The royalties, I wrote a song for another artist that has something like 7 million streams. It's not my song. I mean, the royalties are I don't even think it's $50.
What?
Yeah, because the streaming royalties that come in. It wasn't a radio record. So that's fine, whatever, but it's not fine because writers are taking the biggest hit. And radio is now TikTok, I think pays $0. Radio has become the last place that a record goes now. So I think that artists are going to be hit. I mean, everyone's going to be hit hard, so it's hard to argue anyone's going to feel it more than others. But I mean, artists are, it's not going to affect, the top 2%, and it's going to destroy the bottom 90%.
I think it's just going to be a weird world once we all merge because with everything shut down, I just really don't even know what to expect when people go back to their jobs or going back to their regular routines. What is it going to look like? In terms of even concerts, I think it's going to be a long time before we have these huge sold out events where people are coming to see you headline, right? I just don't see it happening anytime soon.
How is it going to change people? Sonu Nigam did a beautiful concert the other day. And I listened to bits of it. I mean, his voice is magical. And then I thought to myself, people are going to want this for free. People are going to go, well, homie, just go on Instagram. We'll hook up our speakers. They are not going to want, this was the last beacon. I can still get a gig for 15 grand or 10 grand or 20 grand or whatever it is. And that's a real privilege that most human beings don't have that are in the music industry. But what's going to happen? Are they going to want to pay that in a year? They're going to be like, no, get on Instagram. Do it for free. There's this beautiful moment where art's getting us through it. But my question is it even further decreasing the value of what the product is? I mean, I loved music because it was worth something. I would skip school. I would go to the record store. I'd make sure that I'd bribe the record guy in advance that I'm going to buy a couple of copies to make sure that I got that record, or if it was a special order that I had to pay extra for it. I mean, it was worth something. It meant something. It had value. And let's not sound like dinosaurs here. Things change. But the question is, everyone's saying that now. Everyone's saying a lot of stuff right now. My faith in humanity is, it's on a rocker. I'm not sure what to expect. Are we going to see that we've encroached too much on animal space and that they deserve more space that we've been in? Are we going to see that maybe artists have got us through this, therefore they deserve a living wage?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not confident it's going to happen, but for it to happen, artists need to say something, and not with anger, but to be honest and articulate about how it works. But no one wants to do that because very few people want to do it because the perception of the unattainability of our lifestyle is way more sexy. It's a sexier thing to portray than to say, hey, we've been blessed with this ability to create music or make whatever, and we're successful, but it's also been hard. That narrative, I'm not sure it's going to be amplified enough as it needs to be.
I think this is such a nice time for artists to be releasing content. And I think it's so cool that you've been able to go through your archives and find some unreleased songs or unreleased music videos, and you're releasing it now. I think you're calling it the Quarantine series, right? Is that what it's called?
Quarantine, yeah.
The first one, I want to chat about that one because I've been hearing a story. So Love, I hear a rumor that that song wasn't actually supposed to be yours.
No, it was written for Michael Jackson.
Insane.
And Jackson was going to cut it, and then he passed away. And then when I was working with Jim in the studio, I heard it, and I'm like, yo, we gotta just put a little extra touch on this, change it, because I grew up a huge Michael Jackson fan. So, and then when I cut it, Jim, to his credit, was like, you sound amazing on it, we should put it out. Knowing that there's probably other artists that could have lined up that would have made him a lot more money on it. So, I promised him for the faith in the record that I would give it everything I had to make it a hit, and it's my top 5 greatest performances on a record. For me, amazing. But it was in that weird time where I was mentioning where people didn't know what to make of my R&B-ness or my Indianness, so it just kind of fell through the cracks. But it was the one record that really garnered a lot of responses in the States, where labels were like Flying and Meet Me and Fire and Love are the 2 records that really brought that in. They just they never got past the idea of my name or the Indianness or that kind of thing. So that's disheartening. But musically, I know that would have who knows, maybe it still will be. I think there's no rules anymore. But that was a record, So I never released the video that was made because the video was made in partnership with MuchFact when they had that to help Canadian artists pay for videos. And it was yeah, it's a cool video, but the conversations we're having are Andre 3000, go to Atlanta, feel like this is going to be a US hit, So you hold back on art in the anticipation of these big promises coming through. And then when they don't come through, it's too late to put out a video anyway for something you soft released. So that's happened a few times, but I'm okay with that. Now I'm just I'll just fling it out there because now I'm not in the campaign anymore. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And you've been finding some unreleased songs too. So what happens with that? Is it the same thing that it just wasn't the right timing, or does something else happen, political wise, that you just can't release it?
Both, falling out between managers or artist and producer or whatever, or just sometimes you just go, hey, we can't make a deal work even though we've made the music work. We can't get the business right, and it just sits there. And the funny thing about that is 10 years later you say, look, we couldn't get the business right, but it's a great song. Should we just get it out to the folks? And we still can't get the business right. But the business model's changed. So let's just split the income on it and put a record out, or whatever the structure would be to put a record out. And so you do that. But that doesn't mean it's a big radio record or anything. It's just saying, hey, these are songs I recorded, unfinished. Sometimes I'm insecure. I've done a cover of a Hindi song. I don't do a lot of covers. I've only done 1 or 2 in my whole career. I've done a cover of a Punjabi song, actually, not a Hindi song. And I went in the studio and I cut it. And it's beautiful, but I don't speak Punjabi. So it's probably really not great Punjabi pronunciation on my part. And I've been insecure. But when I listen to it or I play it to people, it moves me. I like my performance on it. So I'm debating putting that out next week or whatever and see how that goes. But it's just about letting go of the fear of what it's going to look like. And so many artists are obsessed with, buying YouTube views and making sure things perceived to be a certain way that oftentimes, and I've got caught up in the idea of well, if there's not a $40,000 campaign around this, it's only going to get regular 10,000 views. It's not going to get the 20 million views. It needs to stroke my ego and make me feel good and make me look a certain way. So I go, nah, I'll just bury it, because I'll put out the project where I know there's dollars behind it to help kind of amplify the record. And that creates an insecurity as to almost a crippling sense of fear of failure. So you don't put stuff out that you know will just have to live on its own merit and through people spreading it, which is like the hardest way to be successful, right? So once you let go of that, you put it out there, and then you don't care.
You were around before social media, and I was like, I wonder if for an artist like you that's established, is there a direct relationship when you see that you're getting so many followers, so many likes, you're posting, that you've actually noticed then an increase in the amount of people that will go then stream your music or to go buy your records? Do you actually see a connection, a direct link?
No.
I'm just curious about that. I'm like, is that actually going to help you sell records?
No.
If you put something on social media or something on YouTube, and do you right away go, this better get X number of views or comments or whatever for me to feel like, yeah, I'm still like here?
But, my music has a fairly large reach. If it starts to grow, and there's some videos that have less than 1,000 views on there, and there's some that have 10 million views.
Mm-hmm.
I've never paid for a view in my life. Another thing that I'm sanctimonious about that is detrimental towards the perception. But I don't give a shit.
Do you find that a lot of people are buying views? I've heard of this. There's been articles that have talked about this too. That remember Badshaw hit a big milestone for hitting the fastest 1 million views, and apparently people were not promoting it. Like YouTube wasn't promoting it because I guess the theory was they thought that he might have bought it, and that's when I actually started reading articles about how big buying views is.
It happens. I would venture to say that some of those big companies in India, it doesn't matter what the artist does. I wouldn't blame the artist for it. That there's a culture of making sure that if you want to be relevant, you have to have 100 million views. But I would hope, and maybe I'm wrong, that the general public now goes, it doesn't mean anything. We know it doesn't mean anything. A real hit, people feel a hit. They know it. They sing the words back to you when they meet you. That's a hit record. That will never change. The perception outside changes, and where that does hurt is when you do live bookings. People will go, well, I'm obviously going to hire the guy that has 1 million followers as opposed to the guy that has 20,000 followers. So that is something where it affects people. But even there, they're finding that the guy with 1 million followers is not necessarily putting more butts in seats than the person with 3,000 followers, because it depends who they are, how invested they are, and what your music means to them, for them to want to spend $50 and come see your concert for $100 or buy a vinyl. So cleansing yourself of what people think of you. I mean, as Indian kids growing up, that's something we were probably not taught. But if you could just not worry about log kya sochenge about you, it is a way better place to be to make great art.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm almost running out of time with you, so I'm going to wrap this up. But I always like to leave each episode with some words of wisdom, because I know a lot of people right now are looking at artists like you that are established, that see what the greatest thing about artists like you is you clearly love what you get to do. You get to do it for a living. And I think we're living in a generation where more and more, especially South Asian kids, can dream that. Before growing up, you were kind of just surviving. You were doing what your parents thought. And now we're in a generation where so many successful brown people are in different industries, that I feel like now there's that momentum of being like, you know what, if you have a passion for something, be it music, be it TV, business, politics, whatever, go for it. So I always like to leave each podcast with just some reflection from someone like yourself about the next generation of artists, like even your daughter. Let's say as she grows older, what kind of advice would you give her in terms of making it? Like, what does it actually take to make it?
Oof, I don't know. Be good. There's a lot of people doing it that maybe aren't that good, but there's a structure in place that allows them to be famous or do whatever. And to those guys, I give them even more credit. Because it's like, if you're not blessed with an amazing voice or an amazing talent or whatever, and you still manage to put it together and do something, I mean, that's like, there's more credit. But I think that if you spend time honing how talented you are, how good you are, Steel Bangles, it's just, I love him. He's a great producer. He's great at what he does. When he's in the lab, he's making something amazing. So be good and love what you do. And don't be, I wish someone had told me how much, what was going to be thrown at me after success. And give me a filter of what to catch and embrace and what to let go right by me. And so I'd say make sure you're confident going in, and just be happy, because it's like, if you're in the game, I mean, that's amazing. I love the players in the NHL who played like 1 game or 2 games. I think those stories are incredible. It's like you work your whole life for a dream. It happens for a fleeting moment. And obviously it's sad that you can do it, but you were there for a minute. And so you got into the game, and it didn't work out in the long run, maybe the way you wanted it to, but that's an accomplishment. I would tell my daughter, just get into the game and then just work hard. You'll stay in the game. You'll be dope.
Let me elaborate, though. You mentioned that you wish you had known what things you should catch and hold on to and what things you should just throw away. So could you elaborate on that?
You don't know what you don't know at the beginning. And then all of a sudden, things are thrown at you that are both complimentary but hurtful to the future of your ability to create art, and things that are done to cut you down that are completely false, that do the same, because it's a competition. And to have a filter that helps you decipher what is true and what is not. I mean, none of us have that in life, but to create a filter either through people around you or to really be steeped in who you are before you get into it is really helpful. I'm lucky that I had a family before it all happened, and have a family now that kind of helped me decipher through it, but it was still something that was difficult to figure out. So the filter of knowing where criticism is beneficial versus knowing when criticism is a weapon being used against you to cut you down is a huge important filter for artists to have, because then you end up compromising your art. And when you compromise the integrity of what you do, the outcome is inevitable. Even if you win for a minute, the outcome is inevitable. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I always like to give some insight, because I know so many artists would kill to have this opportunity, right? To talk to someone that's been in the business for so many years, to be like, hey, how should I do this? Because that's the number one thing I hear from artists. They're always like, especially if you're a South Asian artist in North America, they're always like, they wish there was more support.
So I look at the next generation, Arjun, Mickey, all these guys. I love them. I just I love them all, because I'm like, they're just like, they learned from what we did, and they've incorporated it into a brand new world where, sometimes things matter to them. Like, I know certain artists say, oh, I have to put out a post at noon, and I sort of like roll my eyes, and I'm going, okay, well, whatever, but I get it. And so I look at them and I just think it's amazing. And I've learned from them now as I start to write chapter 2.
You know what's interesting when you just mentioned Arjun and Mickey, because they are the ones right now that are the new generation. They really love you. Arjun, didn't he get you, or I think his late wife had you perform at his wedding? That's how big of a fan he was of you. And that's why I was like, he could have had anyone in the business, but he had you. So that's gotta be like, you were just saying oftentimes you'll promote them, and let's say if they don't promote you back, I mean, it's kind of nice when this next generation of guys look at someone like you and they go, kudos, I'm actually a big fan of you. I remember listening to you. So I think that must really mean a lot, right?
Of course it does. It's like when Apache Indian opened up doors for us as artists, that whenever I did interviews, I made sure I said the first CD I ever bought was Apache Indian. Mm-hmm. Because it was unbelievable what he was doing at that time. And every time I've seen Apache, or anytime he's asked me to do anything, it's like no brainer. I'm there, because he opened the door a little bit for me, and it was my responsibility, Jay's responsibility, Rishi's responsibility to open the door a little further for the next artist, and these guys for the next. And that's how a community should work. So they are amazing guys. They always speak very respectfully and glowingly about fellow artists. So I respect that about them. And I just think they're super cool. And I hope that they reach even new levels of success, you know?
Yeah. Is there an artist that you're still hoping to collaborate with? You've already collaborated with so many, but I'm just wondering if you had a wish list, is there somebody you've got an eye on?
Quincy Jones and Stevie Wonder.
Okay.
So, you know, AR was on that list, AR Rahman, and we worked together a lot. So I'd like to, you know, if I ever got a chance to make an album again, I'd make it with Quincy Jones if I could. You know, that's the one situation where I go, no, I'm making an album again. I think, who knows? Let's see what happens. But have a producer take me and pull things out of me that I don't know where to put, that would be cool. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you. Hey everybody, this is Raghav. Thanks for listening to my interview. Please subscribe for more videos like this.